The alien princess refused everyone but the human guard. What the Queen realized changed the negotiation. Staff Sergeant Darian Cole had spent 11 years in the Interplanetary Security Division doing the kind of work that nobody photographed for recruitment posters. He'd stood watch at fuel depots on Io during the reclamation riots. He'd pulled a 3-year rotation on Call Station, where the recycled air smelled like burning copper and the politics were worse. He'd escorted 3 ambassadors, 2 corporate arbiters, and 1 very confused professor of xenolinguistics who had accidentally insulted a VETH delegation by sneezing. None of that prepared him for the assignment he received on a Thursday morning in March, delivered by his commanding officer with a particular combination of apology and bureaucratic flatness that Cole had come to associate with assignments that would alter the trajectory of his career in ways he hadn't consented to. "You're being seconded to the Keth-Sava diplomatic mission," said Colonel Yates. "Effective immediately." Cole looked up from his coffee. "The Keth-Sava have never accepted a diplomatic mission. They have now." Yates slid a tablet across the desk. "They reached out 18 days ago. First contact initiated by their side, which is apparently unprecedented. The mission is being fast-tracked because the window they've offered closes in 42 days. Cole read. The Keth-Sava were a multicast civilization from a System 3 relay jumps from the outer Jovian perimeter. They were not hostile exactly. The word diplomats used was ceremonially rigid. What that meant in practice was that every interaction with them was governed by a framework of social protocol so dense and interlocking that the ISD had an entire subdivision dedicated to modeling it. The Keth-Sava had ended 2 prior contact attempts not with violence but with silence, a complete withdrawal of acknowledgement that, in their culture, was functionally equivalent to declaring that the other party had ceased to exist. They were offering talks now. Actual talks. Trade route access through Keth-Sava space would cut 18 months off the deep periphery supply chain. "Why me?" Cole asked. Yates was quiet for a moment. "The mission already has a primary diplomatic team. Ambassador Chen, 2 cultural attaches, a xenolinguistics consult. Your role is security for a specific individual." "Who?" "The Keth-Sava delegation includes the Queen's daughter. 3rd in the line of succession. Her name translates roughly as Sovereign Designate Sorath. The team is calling her Sorath for brevity. She will be present for the entirety of the talks." Yates paused. "She has refused every security escort option we've offered." Cole set down his coffee. "Refused? Every human female officer. Every male officer above a certain rank. Every officer with command insignia. Every officer from a combat specialty." Yates folded his hands. "Their cultural protocol team spent 6 days going through our personnel files. You are the only candidate who cleared their screening." Cole looked at the tablet again. He found the criteria section. He read it 3 times. The Keth-Sava had very specific ideas about who could stand in proximity to someone of Sayaratha's caste and status. The role wasn't a guard in the human sense. The Keth-Sava word was something that translated as the acceptable variable, a presence that was neither threat nor decoration, neither elevated nor dismissible. Someone whose professional purpose was legible but whose social position was genuinely ambiguous within Keth-Sava frameworks. Cole had 11 years of service, no command rank, no combat decorations, no diplomatic credentials. He'd spent his career being exactly good enough at exactly the right things to be consistently passed over for anything that might make him conspicuous. He was apparently ideal. "How long?" he asked. 6 weeks, Yates said. "Possibly 8. Cole thought about the apartment he was renting month to month. The gym bag in his locker. The fact that he'd been meaning to get a plant and kept forgetting. "When do I ship out?" he said. The transport to the Covenant of Meridian, the orbital station where the talks would be held, took 3 days. Cole spent most of it reviewing the Keth-Sava cultural briefing files, which were thorough in the way that all ISD briefing files were thorough. Exhaustively detailed about things he already understood and almost completely useless about the things that actually mattered. He knew, for instance, that the Keth-Sava had 4 biological sexes with distinct social castes, that direct eye contact had different meanings at different elevations, and that the correct greeting for someone of Sayaratha's status involved standing at a specific angle with both hands visible. He did not know why she had refused everyone else. The briefing files noted the refusal as a fact and declined to speculate. Cole had learned, over 11 years, that the things the ISD declined to speculate about were usually the most important things. He arrived at the Covenant of Meridian 12 hours before the delegation. He walked the corridors designated for Keth-Sava use, checked sight lines, noted the ventilation panels and the placement of the emergency bulkhead controls. He introduced himself to the station's existing security staff, learned their rotation schedule, and identified the 2 officers who were likely to be problems, not because they were incompetent, but because they were the kind of people who confused confidence with readiness. He ate a meal alone in the secondary commissary and read through the briefing files one more time. The Kethsava delegation arrived at 0600 station time. Cole was at the docking bay. He stood where the protocol team told him to stand and kept his hands visible and his expression neutral. He had been told that Sorath would be the 3rd member of the delegation to disembark. She was, in fact, the 4th, a small deviation that he noted without reaction. She was taller than the briefing photographs suggested, and she moved differently than he'd expected from a member of the ruling caste. The files had described Kethsava nobility as formal, deliberate, ceremonially precise. Sorath walked like someone who was paying attention. She stopped when she reached Cole. The delegation's protocol officer moved to make an introduction. Sorath raised one hand, a subtle gesture for fingers spread, and the officer stopped. She looked at Cole for a long moment. Her eyes were amber gold and her pupils were horizontal, like a goat's, which Cole had been told and had still not entirely prepared himself for. Her head tilted 3 degrees to the right. Cole held still. He kept his hands visible. He met her gaze at the elevation the briefing file specified. Sorath said something in Kethsava. The translation came through Cole's earpiece 2 seconds later in the flat, functional voice of the interpreter AI. You read the material. It wasn't a question. Yes, Cole said. Another pause. Then she said something else. The interpreter took 3 seconds this time. The others read it too. You are the first one who did not then proceed to perform it at me. Cole considered that. Performing it would have been disrespectful, he said. The horizontal pupils contracted slightly. He had no idea what that meant. Yes, she said, in standard, clear and unaccented, which the briefing files had not mentioned she could do. She walked past him into the station. Cole fell into position 2 steps behind her left shoulder, exactly where the protocol files said he should be. The first day of the mission began. He had no idea yet that it was already going sideways, or that sideways, in this case, would turn out to mean something more significant than anything the ISD's models had predicted. The Covenant of Meridian had been built for exactly this kind of negotiation. Long corridors with neutral lighting, common areas designed to feel neither sterile nor warm, every angle of every room studied by architects who understood that environment shapes conversation in ways that diplomats pretend they're immune to. Cole understood this the way he understood most things. Not theoretically but practically, from 11 years of standing in rooms and watching what happened in them. By the end of the first full day, he had learned several things about Sovereign-designate Sorath that were not in the briefing files. She did not eat at the scheduled delegation meals. She ate at irregular intervals, alone or with a single attendant, from food she brought with her from the ship. Cole had noted this during the morning session and confirmed it during the afternoon break. The protocol team hadn't flagged it because they were focused on the diplomatic proceedings. Cole was focused on Sorath. She spent between 4 and 7 minutes each hour doing something with her hands. A subtle movement, fingers flexing and resettling in a specific pattern, that the briefing files described as ritual self-regulation, a Kethsava coping mechanism for high-stress environments. The files had mentioned this as background context. Cole had started timing it on the 2nd hour. She also watched him. Not constantly, not obviously, but he caught it. The slight turn of her head when he shifted weight, the pause and whatever she was doing when he moved to check a corridor. The Kethsava were described as socially sophisticated, which was a diplomatic way of saying they were always reading the room. Cole was used to being the person who read the room. Being read in return was unfamiliar. He found he didn't particularly mind it. The talks themselves were not his concern. He had been briefed on the general outline, trade routes, relay access, some territorial demarcation questions. But Ambassador Chen had made clear, politely and firmly, that Cole's role was security, not observation. He was not to attend the formal sessions. He was to be present in the corridor during breaks, available during meals, and on overnight rotation with 2 other officers for the sleeping quarters. What Ambassador Chen had not anticipated, what Cole suspected nobody had anticipated, was that Sorath did not go to the formal sessions. She went to the first one. Cole stood in the corridor and watched the door close behind the entire delegation at 0900. At 0923 the door opened and Sorath walked out. She walked to where Cole was standing and stopped. Cole did not reach for his radio. He did not check with the protocol team. He waited. Is there something you need? He said. She tilted her head the same 3 degrees as the day before. The room, she said, is configured incorrectly. Cole considered this. Incorrectly how? The central table is at a height that implies equivalency. She said it flatly, not as a complaint but as a statement of architectural fact. Ketsava negotiation protocol requires that the parties acknowledge differential standing before addressing areas of mutual interest. A table that positions us as equals before that acknowledgement has occurred is not a neutral surface. It is an assertion. Cole looked at the closed door. Have you told the protocol team? I told them during the preliminary review 3 days ago. She paused. The table was not changed. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his radio. Cole to Reyes, he said. I need a station facilities contact. Now. There was a pause. Lieutenant Reyes, the ISD liaison, came back 30 seconds later with a name and a channel. Cole switched frequencies, explained what he needed, and got the station's head of physical arrangements on the line within 4 minutes. The table, it turned out, was adjustable. It had 6 height settings. Nobody had asked. Cole relayed the specifications Sorath provided. She spoke them quietly at his shoulder, precise measurements in Ketsava units that he converted on the fly using the calculator on his tablet. The facilities team reconfigured the room in 22 minutes. When Sorath walked back into the session, Cole returned to his position in the corridor. He was there for 3 minutes before his earpiece crackled. Reyes sounding confused. Cole, what did you just do? Ambassador Chen wants to know who authorized a room reconfiguration. I did, Cole said. You're a staff sergeant. Yes. A longer pause. Chen's not happy. Is the session proceeding? Yes. Then I'll take the debrief at end of day, Cole said and switched back to the ambient channel. He thought about it for the rest of the morning. Not the room reconfiguration, that had been straightforward. He thought about the fact that Sorath had walked out of the room and come directly to him. Not to her delegation's protocol officer. Not to the ISD liaison. Not to Ambassador Chen. To him. He didn't know what that meant yet. But he'd been doing this long enough to know that it meant something. The debrief with Ambassador Chen happened at 1900 in a small conference room 2 corridors from the diplomatic wing. Chen was not angry exactly, she was too experienced for anger to be her primary mode, but she was precise in her frustration, which Cole found more instructive. You overstepped, she said. I solved a problem that was stalling the session, Cole said. You solved it by circumventing the established communication chain. Any request from the Ketsava delegation should have come through their protocol officer, then to my attaches, then to facilities. That process exists for a reason. It does, Cole agreed. And if we'd used it, the room would have been reconfigured tomorrow morning, after a day of talks conducted under conditions the Ketsava delegation found insulting. Chin was quiet. The process is designed for normal diplomatic pace, Cole said. Sorath walked out of the room. That wasn't normal. She needed the problem solved in the time it takes to solve a problem, not the time it takes to route a request. Why did she come to you? Chin asked. I don't know, Cole said, which was honest. But she did. And the session is continuing. Chin looked at him for a long moment. She had the face of someone recalibrating. Cole had seen that expression before on officers who were good at their jobs. The protocol team is going to want to review your interactions with her, Chin said finally. This is day 2. I know. If she's forming an attachment, a proxy relationship, anything that creates dependency. She's not attached to me, Cole said. She found me useful. Those aren't the same thing. Chin nodded slowly. Keep me informed. Directly. Not through channels. Yes, ma'am, Cole said. He left the meeting and walked back to his rotation post. The corridor was quiet, the station's low hum the only sound. He turned something over in his mind that he hadn't said to Chin. That Sorath hadn't come to him because of something he'd done. She'd come to him because of something he hadn't done. He hadn't performed the briefing files at her. He hadn't looked at her and seen a diplomatic asset or a cultural puzzle or an obstacle to manage. He'd looked at her and seen someone who was paying attention to everything, and he'd responded by paying attention back. That was, apparently, unusual. Cole didn't know whether to find that sad or useful. He suspected by the time this mission was over, it would be both. On the 4th day, Sorath asked him a question that had no good answer. They were in the secondary observation lounge. A room that existed on the mission schedule as a break space for the Ketsava delegation, separated from the primary diplomatic wing by 40 meters of corridor. Cole stood near the door. Sorath sat at the curved window that looked out at the planet below, a blue-gray gas giant whose name Cole had never bothered to learn. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes doing the hand-flexing pattern. He had not interrupted it. "What do humans do," she said, "when they are expected to reach an agreement they believe is premised on a false understanding?" Cole took a moment before answering. "Which false understanding?" She turned from the window. Her horizontal pupils were fully dilated. He'd been watching those without meaning to, had started to learn what the variations meant. Wide was something like calm or something like focus. He hadn't yet worked out which. "The understanding," she said carefully, "that this negotiation concerns trade routes." Cole kept his expression neutral. "What does it concern?" "That is what I am trying to determine." She turned back to the window. "The delegation I accompany has a stated purpose and an actual purpose. These are not unusual conditions. Diplomacy rarely presents its real intentions in the opening position." "No," Cole agreed. "But I am not part of either purpose," she said. "I am present because the Queen required my presence. I was told this was ceremonial. That my role was to demonstrate that the line of succession endorsed the mission." She paused. "I have now been present for 4 days. I have observed the sessions I was permitted to attend, and I have observed the interactions in the corridors and the meals that are not formally logged." Another pause. "This mission is not about trade routes." Cole said nothing. "I am not asking you to confirm it," she said. "I am asking what you do as a professional whose purpose is protection, when you are protecting someone who does not have accurate information about the situation they are in." Cole thought about that. He thought about it carefully because she deserved a careful answer. "My job," he said finally, "is to make sure you're physically safe. It doesn't extend to making sure you're correctly informed." "I know that," she said. "That was not my question." He thought about it longer this time. "Personally," he said, "I don't like it. I've been in situations where someone I was protecting was being managed. It's uncomfortable." He paused. "What I do usually is keep doing the job I was given and flag the concern to whoever I report to." "And if the person you report to is part of the management?" Silence. "Then," Cole said, "it gets complicated." Sorath made a sound, not quite a word, something between agreement and resignation. "Yes," she said. "It does." They stayed in that room for another 10 minutes, Cole near the door and Sorath at the window. He didn't ask what she suspected the mission was actually about. She didn't ask him what he knew. But something had shifted. Cole could feel it, not in the room but in his own assessment of the situation, which had been recalibrating steadily since day one and had now clicked into a new position. Sorath wasn't here as a ceremonial presence. She was here because someone had put her here, and whoever that was had either underestimated her or was counting on something that hadn't happened yet. Cole didn't like either option. He flagged it to Chin that evening. Not the full conversation. There were parts of it that felt like they belonged to Sorath rather than to the mission report, but the essential shape of it. The sovereign designate was aware that the negotiations were more complicated than she'd been told. She was asking questions. She was paying attention. Chen's response was a silence that lasted 3 full seconds, which was a long time for someone who negotiated for a living. "She said this to you?" Chen said. "Yes. She's been present for 4 days and she's already reading the room better than half my team." "She's been reading it since she got off the ship," Cole said. "She was always reading it." Another silence. "Cole, what do you know about the Keth Sava succession structure?" "What's in the files?" "The files say she's third in line." "Yes." "What the files don't say," Chin said carefully, "is that the first and second in line are both aligned with a faction within the Keth Sava ruling body that does not want this negotiation to succeed. The Queen initiated this mission in part because Sorath is the only member of the succession who is not committed to that faction." Cole let that settle. "So she's not ceremonial." "She was never ceremonial. She's here because the Queen needs at least one member of the delegation who might actually want this to work." Chin paused. "And because having her here gives the Queen political cover for whatever comes next." "Does Sorath know this?" "She wasn't supposed to." Cole thought about the window and the gas giant, and the question that had no good answer. "She's figured it out," he said. "Maybe not all of it, but enough." Chin was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had the texture of someone making a decision in real time. "I need you to keep doing what you're doing," she said. "Whatever it is. She trusts you in some functional sense. Don't push it, don't use it, just keep doing it." "I'm not doing anything," Cole said. "That's the point." He could hear Chin almost understand that. That night, on the second rotation of the overnight watch, Cole sat in the corridor outside the Keth Sava quarters and thought about wait. Sorath was in there, somewhere in the dark, carrying something she'd been given without her consent and had figured out anyway. She was third in line for the leadership of a civilization. She was alone in a diplomatic context that had more layers than her own people had told her. She was young. The files put her at the equivalent of her mid-20s, though Ketsava aging didn't map cleanly, and she was sharp enough to be dangerous to whoever was managing her. And she was talking to him. Not because he was strategic. Not because he was powerful. Because he'd read the briefing files and then put them down and looked at her like a person. Cole had a low tolerance for sentiment as a general rule. He'd cultivated it deliberately. Sentiment got in the way of clear assessment. But he'd been in enough hard situations to know the difference between a person using you and a person reaching for something solid. Sorath was reaching. He didn't know what to do with that yet. He sat in the corridor and let the station hum around him and thought about what kind of person shows up to a negotiation that's been stacked against them and still asks honest questions. The answer, he thought, was the kind you could trust. He filed that away and waited for the rotation to end. On the 6th day, a message arrived from the Ketsava homeworld. Cole was not supposed to know about it. He found out because Lieutenant Reyes, who managed the mission's communication logs, was the kind of officer who got visibly anxious when something changed the texture of his day, and Cole had been watching Reyes for 6 days and could read his anxiety like a weather system. Something came through, Cole said, not as a question. Reyes looked up from his station. That's not. Something from the Ketsava side. High priority encoding. Cole had seen the antenna array light up from across the corridor. From the homeworld, not the ship. Reyes said nothing, which was confirmation. I don't need to read it, Cole said. I need to know if it changes anything about Sayarath's physical situation. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Queen sent a direct communication to her delegation. Not to Ambassador Chen. Not through the joint channel. He lowered his voice. To Sorath. Cole made sure his face did nothing. To Sorath specifically. The encryption was keyed to her biometrics. Reyes hesitated. Our monitoring caught the transmission's existence but not its content. We don't have the key. Nobody told the delegation? We're not sure we're supposed to. Cole walked away from Reyes and down the corridor to the observation lounge. He knocked once, the pattern he'd established on day 2, 2 short, 1 long, and waited. Sayarath's attendant opened the door. Sorath was already looking at him from across the room. She had a small device in her hands, something that looked like a communication tablet but wasn't. Ketsava technology had a visual language Cole was starting to recognize. You know, he said. I received it 40 minutes ago, she said. She looked at the device. You should probably come in. Cole glanced at the attendant. Sorath said something in Ketsava. The attendant left, closing the door behind them. Cole stood in the room. He did not sit. Sitting implied a duration he wasn't certain was appropriate. My mother, Sorath said, has sent me a private instruction. She set the device down. She has told me that the faction opposing this negotiation has made a move within the Home Council. A procedural challenge to her authority to conduct foreign relations without full council approval. Cole processed this. It's a legal challenge? Political. With legal structure. She folded her hands in her lap. It was filed 12 hours ago. If it succeeds, the authority for this negotiation transfers to the full council, which is currently controlled by the opposing faction. She paused. The mission would end. What does she want you to do? She wants me to accelerate my assessment. Sorath looked at him directly. She sent me here because she believes I can determine whether this negotiation is worth the political cost of defending it. Cole felt something click into place, the full shape of it finally visible. The Queen hadn't sent her daughter as cover. She'd sent her as an instrument of independent assessment. Sorath wasn't there to endorse the mission. She was there to evaluate it. She didn't tell you that before you left, Cole said. No. Something in Sayarath's voice was flat in a way that wasn't anger exactly. Closer to the particular disappointment of someone who had expected more. She told me it was ceremonial. She didn't trust you to participate genuinely if you knew you were the real evaluation. She was right, Sorath said. If I had known, I would have performed the assessment. I would have asked the questions an assessor asks. I would have looked for the things I was supposed to find. She paused. Instead I arrived expecting nothing and I observed everything. She looked at the window. She is very good at what she does. Cole was quiet. She is also, Sorath said, putting me in a position where I must make a recommendation that affects the course of our civilization's foreign relations, alone in 42 hours. 42 hours? That is how long before the council challenge reaches formal consideration. If I can report to her with sufficient confidence before then, she can defend the mission on the grounds that the succession has evaluated and endorsed it. The opposing faction's claim, that she acted unilaterally, becomes weaker if the heir apparent has independently confirmed the mission's value. Cole thought about this for a long moment. What do you need? Sorath looked at him. I have questions that I cannot ask within the formal session structure. There are things happening in this negotiation that the session record does not reflect, and I need to understand them. What kind of things? The human delegation, she said carefully, is not unified in wanting this to succeed. Cole said nothing. There is a faction within your own diplomatic mission that is obstructing, she said. Subtly. I have observed it across 6 days. Certain information reaches Ambassador Chin slowly. Certain requests from our protocol team are addressed incompletely. The obstructions are small enough that individually they appear to be errors. She paused. They are not errors. No, Cole said. They're not. He'd seen it too. He hadn't said anything because it wasn't his domain. He was security, not diplomatic oversight. But he'd seen it. If I am to recommend that my mother defend this mission, Sorath said, I need to know whether the obstruction can be resolved, or whether the mission is structurally compromised. Cole looked at her for a long moment. She was sitting very still, and her pupils were doing something he hadn't catalogued before. A slow, rhythmic contraction and expansion that he suspected meant something like controlled fear, or something adjacent to it. The thing a person's body does when they're holding themselves steady over a very deep drop. I can't answer that, Cole said. Not in my official capacity. I know, she said. I am asking you personally. Cole thought about 11 years of doing the job right. He thought about Chen's instruction to keep doing what he was doing without using it. He thought about the difference between using a person and telling them the truth. Give me until morning, he said. Sorath nodded once. Cole left the room and walked directly to Ambassador Chen's quarters and knocked on the door until it opened. Chen listened without interrupting, which was how Cole knew she understood the severity of what he was telling her. When he finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. The clock on her wall, an actual analog clock which Cole found oddly grounding, ticked through it. You're telling me, she said, that the sovereign designate has independently identified the obstruction within my team. Yes. And that she has a 42-hour window to report to the Queen. Yes. And that she's asking you, a staff sergeant, to help her determine if this mission is worth saving. Yes. Chin stood and walked to her narrow window. The gas giant was visible from this angle too. Cole wondered if anyone else on the station had spent as much time looking at it. I've known about the obstruction for 3 days, Chin said. Cole absorbed that. And I've been building a case. Methodically. The way you're supposed to. She turned. The obstructions trace back to 2 of my attaches who have external relationships with parties that don't want this deal to go through. Trade competitors effectively. I have enough to act, but acting requires documentation and documentation requires time. Time you don't have. Time Sorath doesn't have, Chin said. Which is different. She looked at him. If I move now without the full documentation, I expose myself to a counter-complaint. It becomes a disruption in the middle of a critical mission rather than a disciplined resolution. If you don't move now, Cole said, Sayaratha's window closes. Chin was quiet. And if Sayaratha's window closes, Cole continued, the Queen can't defend the mission before the Council challenge. The mission ends. Your documentation becomes a post-mortem. I know the logic, Chin said sharply. Then quieter, I know the logic. She walked to her desk and sat down. Picked up a tablet. Set it down. Picked it up again. Here's what I can do, she said finally. I can move both attaches out of the active session team tonight. Medical evaluation. One of them has been complaining about headaches, which is documented. The other I can reassign to the communication archive review, which is legitimate work and effectively removes them from any influence over the next 48 hours. She paused. It's not a formal resolution. But it stops the bleeding. Can you tell Sorath that? Cole said. I can't tell Sorath anything. Any direct communication between Ambassador Chin and the sovereign designate outside formal session channels is a protocol breach. Cole thought about it for about 3 seconds. I can tell her. Chin looked at him for a long moment. You're a staff sergeant. Yes. This is significantly outside your job description. My job description, Cole said, is to make sure she's safe. Right now the thing threatening her safety is that she doesn't have enough information to do the thing she was sent here to do. He paused. That's not a physical threat. But it's not nothing. Qin held his gaze. He held hers. Tell her, Qin said, that the structural concerns she's identified are being addressed. That the process correction happens tonight. Tell her that Ambassador Qin is aware of the situation and has it in hand. Pause. And tell her that the mission is worth defending. That the trade access is real, the commitment is genuine on our side, and that if the Queen can hold the window open, what comes through it will matter. Is that true? Cole said. All of it. Yes, Qin said. All of it. Cole nodded. He left. He went back to the observation lounge. Knocked. The attendant let him in. Sorath was still at the window. She hadn't moved the device. Cole told her what Qin had said, plainly and in the order he'd received it. He did not editorialize. He did not suggest what she should do with it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You trust her assessment, Sorath said. I trust that she's telling me the truth, Cole said. Whether the mission succeeds is not something she can guarantee. No. Sorath turned from the window. But the commitment is genuine. She said so. You believe her? Yes. Sorath looked at him directly. Her pupils were steady now, not the rhythmic contraction of before. You have been working in this building for 6 days, she said. You have no political stake in this outcome. You have been given an assignment that is beneath your capability and given it because you are precisely unremarkable enough to pass our screening criteria. She paused. You should have no particular reason to care whether this mission succeeds. No, Cole agreed. Why do you? He thought about it honestly. Because you've been trying to do the right thing since you got off the ship. And the right thing keeps getting obstructed by people who don't care about right things, just convenient ones. He paused. I don't like that. Sorath was quiet. Also, he said, 18 months off the supply chain is a lot of shipping time. That matters to people. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, the Kethsava features weren't configured for it, but an analog of one. A slight softening around the horizontal pupils. I will send my report to the Queen tonight, she said. Cole nodded. Turn to leave. Cole, she said. He stopped. The word we use, she said. The acceptable variable. It is not what you might think. It is not a diminishment. She paused. In Kethsava assessment practice, the variable is the element that reveals what all the constants are doing. Everything stable and known shows its actual nature only when the variable is introduced. She looked at him. You have been showing me what everything in this room is actually doing. Cole stood in the doorway for a moment. Get some sleep, he said. You have a report to write. He went back to his post. The response from the Queen arrived 14 hours later. This time Cole wasn't watching the antenna array. He was told about it directly. Sorath's attendant found him in the commissary at 0640 and led him back to the observation lounge without explanation. Sorath was standing, not sitting. That was new. My mother has responded, she said. Cole waited. She has read my report. She is, pleased is not the right word. She considers the assessment thorough. Sorath paused. She has decided to defend the mission before the council. She is invoking the sovereign assessment precedent, which is a mechanism that formally recognizes an independent evaluation by a member of the succession as grounds for unilateral executive action in foreign relations. Another pause. The precedent has not been used in 112 years. Cole registered the weight of that. She's committing to it. She is. Sorath looked at the device in her hands. She has also sent a secondary message. Separate encryption. Personal. She looked up. She asked me to describe the human I referenced throughout my report. The one I called the acceptable variable. Cole kept his face neutral. What did you tell her? I told her what you are. Rank, service record, assignment context. Sorath paused. She asked what you had done to gain my confidence. What did you say? I told her you had done very little. That you had been present, attentive, and honest, and that you had helped me obtain what I needed without attempting to use my need as leverage. She looked at him steadily. She found this remarkable. She shouldn't, Cole said. It's basic. Yes, Sorath said. That is what she found remarkable. Cole thought about that. He thought about what it meant for a thing to be basic and still be remarkable, for simple decency to be sufficiently rare in high-stakes environments that a queen noticed its absence and its presence with equal clarity. She also said something else, Sorath said. About the negotiation. What? She said that she sent me here to evaluate whether the mission was worth defending politically. Whether it was structurally sound, genuinely motivated, not a trap or a delay. Sorath paused. She received my report and concluded that the mission was worth defending. But she told me that the evidence she found most compelling was not the analysis of the trade terms or the assessment of Ambassador Chen's sincerity. Cole waited. She said the most compelling evidence, Sorath said, was that I had found someone in the human delegation whom I trusted enough to ask an honest question. The lounge was quiet. Below, the gas giant turned in its slow, indifferent orbit. She said, Sorath continued, a civilization that produces people like that is one worth negotiating with. Cole was quiet for a long time. He thought about what to say. He thought about deflecting it, about saying that the Queen was being generous or that he was just doing his job, or some other thing that would redirect the weight of the moment somewhere easier to stand. He didn't say any of those things. I hope the negotiation succeeds, he said finally. Genuinely. It may, Sorath said. It may not. The council challenge is not resolved. The internal faction within your delegation has been removed but not formally addressed. There are many things that can still fail. She set the device down. But the window is still open. Yeah, Cole said. It is. Sorath looked at him. Her pupils were steady, the same quality of focus he'd seen on the first day at the docking bay. What happens to you, she said, when this mission ends? I go back to my regular rotation. Nothing changes for you. Probably not. She considered this. That seems incorrect. It's how it works, Cole said. Most of the time the people who hold things together aren't the ones who get credited with it. In Kethsava culture, she said, the acceptable variable is recorded. In formal assessment practice, when an independent evaluation occurs, the variable that enabled clear observation is documented in the permanent record. She paused. Your name will be in my report. Cole blinked. I'm in your report. Throughout. She tilted her head the familiar 3 degrees. My mother has already read it. She knows who you are. Another pause. I thought you should know that. Cole didn't know what to do with that. He stood with it for a moment, the way you stand with something unexpected. Not rejecting it, just making room. Thank you, he said. Don't, Sorath said not unkindly. It is simply accurate. At noon that day, the session that had been stalled by the internal obstruction resumed. Chen's 2 attaches were absent. Their replacements, 2 officers from the backup team who had no external affiliations, conducted themselves without incident. Cole stood in the corridor and listened to the quiet from behind the closed door that meant things were, for now, proceeding. He thought about the Queen, somewhere across 3 relay jumps, reading her daughter's report in the middle of a political crisis she had engineered and was now defending. He thought about what it meant to send someone you'd raised into a situation you hadn't fully disclosed, because the undisclosed context was the only way to get an honest reading. He thought it was a hard thing to do, even if it was the right thing. He thought Sorath had handled it better than most people would have. He stood in the corridor and watched the door and let the afternoon pass. The mission concluded on day 31, 11 days ahead of the initial schedule. The trade route framework was agreed in principle on day 28, submitted to formal review on day 30, and signed by both parties on day 31 in a ceremony Cole watched from the doorway of the main hall because his clearance didn't extend to the room itself. He had a good view. He watched Ambassador Chen and the Kethsava delegation lead's formal representative press whatever the Kethsava equivalent of a signature was onto whatever the Kethsava equivalent of a document was, and he thought, there it is. Sorath was not in the room. Formally, her role had been observational. She had no signatory authority, which was fine, because her purpose had never been to sign. She was in the observation lounge when the ceremony happened. Cole checked. He went there afterward. It's done, he said. She was looking out the window. The gas giant was still there, still turning. In 31 days he had watched it cycle through 2 full rotational periods, which meant it was faster than it looked. I know, she said. I was monitoring the formal channel. She paused. How do you feel? Cole considered the question. Relieved, he said. Tired. Ready to go home. Where is home? Whatever bunk assignment I get back to. I move around a lot. She made the sound that wasn't quite a word. That sounds lonely. It's what I chose, Cole said, which was true, and was also a thing people said when something is true and they've stopped trying to find another word for it. What will you do? She asked. After. Regular rotation. Maybe Titan Station for the next cycle. Or the IO perimeter if they still need coverage. Nothing will change. I'll know it worked, Cole said. That counts. Sorath turned from the window. She was carrying a small case, physical media, the kind the Kethsava used for formal documentation. She held it out. Cole took it. "That is the formal copy of my assessment report," she said. "The record that will be filed with the Kethsava court archive." She paused. "Your name appears in it 43 times. Cole looked at the case. "You won't be able to read it," she said. "It is in Kethsava formal script. But the archive is accessible through the Joint Diplomatic Database, and if you request a translation, the Office of the Sovereign is obligated to provide one within 90 days. She paused. "I ensured that provision was included in the Cultural Exchange Appendix to the trade agreement." Cole stared at her. "You negotiated that into the agreement." "The Cultural Exchange Appendix covers the right of private individuals to access documents in which they appear as named parties," she said, with the serenity of someone who had done a very specific thing and was comfortable owning it. "It is a provision that may eventually benefit others as well. But it was initially written with a particular case in mind." Cole held the case carefully. It was heavier than it looked. "You did this," he said. "You held the window open," she said. "I thought it was appropriate that you have a record of what came through it." He didn't have a response to that. He stood with it in his hands and found, somewhat to his surprise, that his throat was doing something inconvenient. "I'm glad you were the one they sent," he said finally. "I was not supposed to be the one they sent," she said. "My mother substituted me for the originally intended delegate 4 days before departure." She tilted her head the 3 familiar degrees. "She has not told me why. I suspect now that she saw something in me that she believed would interact well with whatever she found on the other side." "Smart woman," Cole said. "Extraordinarily so." Pause. "I would like to think she also wanted me to have the experience of finding someone trustworthy in an unfamiliar place." She looked at him steadily. "It is useful to know that such people exist." Cole looked at the case in his hands. Then at Sorath. Then out the window at the gas giant. "In your culture," he said, "the acceptable variable gets recorded in the assessment." "Yes." "And in the record," he said, "what is the variable? What does it do? What's its function in the formal language?" Sorath was quiet for a moment. "The formal language says, the variable reveals the constants." She paused. "The poetic translation, which I prefer, is, the variable shows everything what it actually is." Cole nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, "you showed me some things too." She looked at him for a long time. Her pupils were wide and steady. "Goodbye, Darian Cole," she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Goodbye, Sorath," he said. He walked out of the observation lounge and down the corridor, past Reyes at the communication station and the 2 officers from the backup team who'd finished their work, past the door of the main hall where the signed agreement was being formally logged, to the small room where his bag sat packed and ready. He set the Kethsava case on top of it. He thought about the supply chain. 18 months gone. Ships that would arrive faster. Cargo that would reach people sooner. The kind of difference that nobody measures in a single transaction but accumulates across years into something that looks, from a distance, like progress. He thought about a queen reading a report in the middle of a political crisis and finding, tucked inside an assessment of trade terms and diplomatic sincerity, the detail that mattered most. Her daughter had found someone she could ask an honest question. He thought about what that cost, the finding and the asking and the answering. He thought it was probably the cheapest thing in the world in the end. Just being present. Just paying attention. Just responding to a person like they were a person and not an asset or an obstacle or a problem in a briefing file. He picked up his bag. He picked up the case. He went to catch his transport. 3 months later, in a small office on Titan Station, a translation arrived in Cole's message queue. 91 pages, formal Kethsava court language rendered into standard with the flat precision of a diplomatic translator. He read it over 2 evenings with coffee going cold beside him. He was in it the way she'd said, 43 times, specific and factual and documented in the permanent record of a civilization's decision to trust another civilization enough to build something. The last line that mentioned him near the end of the report read, "The acceptable variable performed the function of the acceptable variable." What was constant became visible. The assessment was possible because the variable held still and did not pretend to be something other than what it was. Cole read that 3 times. Then he closed the file, finished his cold coffee and went back to work.